I served 4 tours overseas in the Army, and during the last one, my mother passed away from cancer. My sister Renee handled everything because I couldn't get emergency leave fast enough. By the time I landed back in the States, the funeral was already 3 days away, and my mother's affairs were already being taken care of, according to Renee. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into my mother's house and saw that half her furniture was already gone. Renee said she'd donated some things because the house needed to be cleaned out for the estate sale. I was exhausted, grieving, and jet lagged, so I didn't push it. That was my first mistake. My mother and I had always been close. She raised Renee and me as a single mother after our father left when I was 8 and Renee was 11. Money was always tight growing up, but mom worked 2 jobs, days at a dental office, nights cleaning offices downtown to make sure we never went without. When I joined the military at 18, partly for the steady income and partly to see the world, mom cried for a week. She was proud of me, but she hated that I was so far away. Renee stayed local. She went to community college, dropped out, worked a string of retail jobs, and eventually moved back in with mom temporarily when she was 24. That temporary stay lasted 9 years. By the time mom got sick, Renee was essentially living off her. Mom paid the utilities, bought groceries, and even covered Renee's car payments more than once. I never said anything because I was thousands of miles away and didn't feel like I had the right to judge the day-to-day arrangements. When mom got her diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the prognosis was brutal from the start. 6 months, maybe less. I requested leave immediately, but the Army doesn't move fast for maybe less, and by the time the paperwork cleared, mom had already passed. 4 months from diagnosis to death. I missed it all. The last time I spoke to her was over a grainy video call 2 weeks before she died, and she told me she was proud of me and that everything would be taken care of. I didn't understand what she meant by that until I got home. The funeral itself was small, just family, a few of mom's old coworkers, and a couple of neighbors who'd known her for decades. Renee had picked the venue, the flowers, the casket, everything. I thanked her for handling it, genuinely grateful that I hadn't had to deal with logistics on top of grief. She accepted my thanks with this strange, tight smile that I chalked up to stress. It was during the reception, in the church's fellowship hall, that things started to unravel. Our Aunt Pam, mom's older sister, a woman who has never in her life been capable of keeping anything to herself, asked me aside with a paper plate of finger sandwiches in one hand and asked, "So when do you think you'll get your half of the house money?" Renee said the sale already closed. I remember just staring at her. What house sale? Pam's face went through about 4 different expressions in 2 seconds. Uh, oh, honey, I thought you knew. Renee sold your mama's house last month, said it needed to happen quick because of the medical bills. I felt the floor tilt a little. My mother's house, the house I grew up in, the house mom paid off 15 years ago, free and clear, had been sold while I was overseas, while my mother was dying, and nobody told me. I found Renee near the dessert table, talking to one of mom's old coworkers, laughing at something. I waited until the woman walked away, and then I asked Renee as calmly as I could manage, "Did you sell mom's house?" Her laugh died instantly. "We can talk about this later, Marcus, not here." "Did you sell the house, Renee?" "Yes," she snapped, voice low, glancing around to see who was listening. "There were bills, okay? The hospice care wasn't fully covered and you didn't think to call me, email me, anything? You were literally on a base in the middle of nowhere. What was I supposed to do? Wait for you to fly home so you could sign paperwork while mom was dying?" I'll admit, in the moment, that almost made sense. Almost. Grief makes you forgiving in ways that don't hold up later. "Okay," I said, stepping back. "Okay, so what happened to the money after the bills?" Renee's jaw tightened. "There wasn't much left after everything." "The house was worth at least 280 grand, Renee. Mom owned it outright. Even with hospice costs, there should have been a couple $100,000 left over. Where is it?" People were starting to look at us now. Renee grabbed my arm and pulled me into the hallway outside the fellowship hall, near the coat closets. "You don't get to do this," she hissed. "Not today. Not at Mom's funeral. I don't get to steal an inheritance and then tell me when I'm allowed to ask about it," I said. My voice was rising and I didn't care anymore. "Where is the money, Renee?" "I used some of it to pay off my car and my credit cards, and I put a down payment on a condo, okay? I needed it. I was the one here taking care of everything while you were off playing soldier." There it was, the real reason. Not medical bills, though they're probably worth some, but Renee had used what was likely close to $200,000 of our mother's estate to bail herself out of years of bad financial decisions. And she did it while Mom was actively dying, banking on the fact that I was too far away and too grief-stricken to notice or fight back in time. I want to be clear. I wasn't even attached to the money itself. I have a stable career, a pension coming eventually, savings. What broke something in me was the betrayal that Renee looked at our dying mother's home, the home Mom worked 2 jobs for 30 years to pay off, and saw an opportunity, and that she was willing to let me find out from drunk Aunt Pam at a funeral reception instead of telling me herself. I had until the end of this week to send me documentation of the sale, the will, and where every dollar went, or I'm getting a lawyer. You wouldn't dare, not now. People will think you're a monster fighting over money the day we buried Mom. And that's when I made the decision that I know some people will judge me for, but I don't regret it, not even a little. I walked back into the fellowship hall. The room was maybe 30 people, family, a few old friends, neighbors. I found my Uncle Dale, Mom's younger brother, who had flown in from Ohio and who I knew Mom trusted completely. I asked him, quietly, if he knew anything about the house being sold. He didn't. Nobody did, except apparently Aunt Pam, who'd heard it secondhand from Renee weeks ago and assumed it was common knowledge. I didn't make a big scene right then. I'm not a complete monster, and Mom deserved better than a screaming match at her own funeral. But over the next hour, I quietly talked to the people who mattered. Uncle Dale, my mother's best friend Carol, who had known her for over 40 years and had been a rock during the illness. My cousin Tasha, who Renee was close with and who I knew Renee actually cared what she thought. I told each of them calmly, factually, the house sold for $280,000. Renee handled it without telling me. Renee used the proceeds for her own car, credit card debt, and a condo down payment. I had no documentation of what happened to the rest. I wasn't asking them to do anything. I was just letting the truth exist, letting it breathe in a room full of people who loved my mother and who deserved to know what had been done in her name while she was dying. By the time the reception ended, the temperature in that room had changed completely. Renee left early, practically dragging her husband out the door, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Carol hugged me at the door and just said, "Your mother would be heartbroken, but she'd be glad you know now." The aftermath wasn't pretty. Renee texted me that night calling me every name imaginable, accusing me of destroying the family and embarrassing her in front of everyone. I didn't respond. The next day, Uncle Dale called Renee directly, and apparently the conversation got loud enough that Renee's husband took the phone away from her. I did end up getting a lawyer, not out of spite, but because legally, as the only other heir, I was entitled to half of Mom's estate, and Renee had unilaterally liquidated and spent assets that weren't fully hers to spend. It took almost 8 months, but eventually Renee was forced to take out a loan against her new condo to pay me my share. About $135,000, which accounted for the house sale minus legitimate medical and funeral expenses, with interest for the time I'd been denied access to it. Renee and I haven't spoken since the day she handed me that check through her lawyer. My cousin Tasha still talks to her, and apparently Renee's narrative is now that I humiliated her for no reason and could have just asked privately. Maybe there's truth to that. Maybe I could have pulled her aside more quietly and given her a chance to come clean on her own terms. But I think about my mother working double shifts for 30 years, sacrificing everything so her kids would have something when she was gone. And I think about Renee deciding the moment Mom couldn't speak for herself anymore, that all of that sacrifice was just a slush fund for her own mistakes. I don't think I was wrong to make sure people knew the truth. I just think Renee never expected anyone to actually find out.